Good morning. Good morning, dear students of PG Semester 1, CC2, Unit 2. Today I am going to deliver my lecture on King Lear, King Lear, a tragedy by Shakespeare. So, the today's topic um, of my lecture is the moral world of King Lear. So, what was the morality existing in the play King Lear? So, but God draws the mighty away with his power. He rises up, but no man is sure of life. This is said in a book from the Bible, the book of Job. So, chapter 24 and line 22. The relationship between the book of Job and King Lear has long provided fuel for scholarly fire. Each is a story of suffering, endurance, and loyalty, in which a prosperous man is stripped bare both literally and figuratively, and loses the health, wealth, and family he once prized. Those who have pursued this comparison, however, although content to bask proudly in the glow of complex literary parallels, have often failed to illuminate the real message at the heart of Shakespeare's tragedy. Like the greatest works in the literary canon, the Book of Job and King Lear allow their audiences to delve deeply into the daunting problem of the human condition. Human condition. While their social, political, and historical contexts necessarily have great bearing on how each text is read, they share a central concern that transcends time and place, what it means to be alive and to be human. Alongside their many notable similarities from the tests of loyalty around which each is centered to the storms which reduce both Lear and Job to their most vulnerable, there is a glaring difference between the two tales. After an intense period of suffering, Job is rewarded for his faith, supporting the Deuteronomic doctrine. The promises reward for the righteous and punishment for wrongdoers. Lear, on the other hand, loses everything and dies, seemingly without compensation or explanation. The play's dismal, the play's dismal ending seemed so incongruous to early audiences that in 1681, a new version by Irish poet Nahum Tate found favor. Its happier denouement saw Lear survive and his kingdom inherited and ruled by the now material Cordelia and Edgar. Yet, Tate's The History of King Lear was not an innovation, it was the fact Shakespeare, who had revised the original story by killing off Lear and his one loyal daughter. The tale of the English king, the tale of the English king, which was first recorded in 1135 by Geoffrey of Monmouth, who dated it back to the 8th century BC, and which later appeared in a variety of works, including Spenser's The Fairy Queen, traditionally ends with Lear's or Liar's return to power. Shakespeare made the deliberate choice to turn this old story of inheritance, invasion, and restoration into a tragedy that sees not only the controversial king but also his honorable and honest daughter meet a sorry end. Why he did so was a mystery, even to the literary titan, Dr. Johnson, who says, in the present case, the public has decided Cordelia, from the time of Tate, has always retired with victory and felicity. And if my sensations could add anything to the general suffrage, I might relate that I was many years ago so shocked by Cordelia's death that I know not whether I ever endured to read again the last scenes of the play till I undertook to revise them as an editor. Samuel Johnson, Preface to King Lear. Why? Why is it that in a narrative so informed by one of the most important writings on theodicy, Shakespeare appears to deprive his characters and his audience of an explanation for their suffering? One straightforward response might be that King Lear is a tragedy, and that unmitigated suffering should not therefore come as a surprise. Even a cursory glance at Shakespeare's other tragedies, however, tells us that there is always meaning in the misery. Another response, indeed one voiced by many critics, could be that the bard is using this play to express his religious doubts, and that Lear's experience offers insight into the playwright's tentative agnosticism. The work is certainly set in a pre Christian England, but is it a pagan play? In the first act, Lear claims that he is ready to relinquish power over his kingdom, although he hopes that his early retirement, he hopes that his early retirement will allow him an unburdened crawl toward death. What actually follows is not a smooth and signified journey through his final years, but a relapse into the helplessness of childhood. In his advanced age, Lear grows increasingly childlike in his obstinate demands. Bid them come forth and hear me, or at their chamber, doctor, I will beat the drum till it cries sleep to death. In Act 2, scene 4, lines 117 to 119. Physicist, physical dependency. Who are you? Mine eyes are not over the best, and struggle to express himself. Howl, howl, howl in Act 5, Scene 3. This regression has often been seen as the result of his frustration as he finds himself powerless against his will. Despite his ostensible enthusiasm in abdicating his throne, it becomes clear that Lear is not yet willing to release control entirely. The test of loyalty he gives each of his daughters at the start of the play demonstrates that Lear is still determined to have some degree of emotional uh, leverage over them. In demanding their assurances of love, he shows that he will let go of his land but not of his power or pride. And the very act of permanently dividing up his kingdom points towards a desperation to exert control over events that would naturally occur outside of his own lifetime. Similarly, rather than allow Cordelia to deny him the parental affection he craves, Lear rejects her. Here I disclaim all my paternal care, propinquity, and property of blood, and as a stranger to my heart and me, hold thee from this forever. Act 1, Scene 1, lines 125 to 8. The king also attempts to retain part of his royal authority, exercising the power to banish subjects and demanding that he be allowed to keep an armed guard. His insistence that his band of knights should not be reduced in number has even been read by some as an elaborate pun on the word knights, implying a refusal to accept the shortening of his life. Such reactions shed light on Lear's need for control, which in turn leads to his refusal to accept that which is outside of his purview. His rejection of the Cordelia following her honest but unwelcome admission, his stubborn determination to cling onto the vestiges of kingship, and his denial of death as the ultimate end to his power are the most important instances of this anxiety. But it is also manifested manifested. But it is also manifested in the groundless rebuttals with which he contradicts other characters throughout the play. Self-deceiving and defensive, Lear offers a master class in how not to face old age, growing impotence, and death. Interestingly, Lear's suffering also serves as a partial solution to his unhealthy desire for control and denial of his own weakness, as though he learns to accept reality. He abandons Goneril and Regan after they refuse to respect his requests, and standing on the lonely heath amid a storm with only a fool for company, he comes to the realization that he, a poor, infirm, weak, and despised old man, Act 3 Scene 2, no longer has the power to command authority as he once did. Lear's anagnosis remains incomplete, however, until the final act of the play in the aftermath of Cordelia's death. From the beginning, it is clear that Cordelia is to play a significant part in her father's struggles. Shakespeare takes full advantages of the etymology of her name, peppering the dialogue with heart imagery and metaphors. The Latin chord stem means heart, and thus hints at her fundamental role in matters of life and death. Lear himself acknowledges this mysterious power, anticipating early on that her absence will ultimately lead to his own end. Hence, and avoid my sight. So be my grave, my peace, as here I gave her father's heard from her. Act 1, Scene 1, lines 139 to 141. Feud went so far to identify the youngest daughter as the play's symbol of death and accompanied by the predictable psychoanalysis involving incestuous feelings interprets her hanging as the turning point in Lear's attitude towards mortality. Eternal wisdom in the garb of primitive myth bids the old man renounce love, choose death, and make friends with the necessity of dying. Sigmund Freud, The Theme of the Three Cascades. It was published in 1925. Although Cordelia's death leads directly to Lear's own, the reconciliation between the two brings redemption as well as ruin. Cordelia, Cordelia, who redeems nature from the general curse. Act 4, Scene 6, Scene 6, lines 209 to 210 returns from the safety of France with an army to reinstate Lear to his throne and to offer him the personal comforts and forgiveness he needs in his sickness. In this way, she is prepared to sacrifice both her pride and her own safety for the sake of the father who rejected her, vowing that he that helps take all my outward worth. Act 4, Scene 4. Partially revived by her efforts, Lear recognizes Cordelia as a soul in bliss. Act 4, Scene 6. And begins to yield to her as a higher power. If you have poison for me, I will drink it. Such imagery has naturally led to comparisons between Cordelia, between and Cordelia and Christ. But again, we are faced with the provocative difference between scripture and stage. Jesus dies for the sake of man's sins and is gloriously resurrected, while Cordelia's death is final and apparently fruitless, since Lear's final lines, in which he convinces himself that he sees life in the face of his daughter's corpse, suggests that he has lapsed into his old pathological habits of denial, anger, and delusion. His initial reaction, however, indicates that Cordelia's death has reconciled the king, or at least open his eyes to the undeniable fact of human mortality. His hopeless cry of never, 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 never in Act 5, Scene 3, line 372. And his bitter question of why should a dog, a horse, a rat have life, and thou no breath at all? A point towards an acknowledgement, even an acceptance of death. Her sacrifice does not and cannot stop the old man from dying. But this double death need to entail a godless abyss. Lear makes no mention of no mention of heaven or the prospect of life after death, but it seems natural that such ideas would present themselves to both Shakespeare and his immediate audience, immersed as they were in biblical imagery and Christian belief. We can thus distinguish in the narrative movement towards the redemption and the transcendent. Through his own suffering, Lear feels the effects of his earlier actions and learns his limitations through Cordelia's sacrifice. He is brought face to face with the brutal fact of mortality and fear. Through his own suffering, Lear feels the effects of his earlier actions and learns his limitations through Cordelia's sacrifice. He is brought face to face with the brutal fact of mortality at the moment of his own death. It is down to the audience to decide whether it is a blessing or a curse. Kent's reaction seems to favor the former interpretation. Vex not his ghost. Oh, let him pass. He hates him. That would open the rack of his tough world, stretch him uh, out longer. So in Act 5, Scene 3, lines 380, 80 to 2. Kent laments the physical torment one faces in the world Kent laments the physical torment one faces in the world as part and parcel of being human, but his words also hint at the hope of better things to come and a new world into which each of us will eventually pass. In this way, the tale of suffering, loss, and death clearly can be interpreted as an expression of Christian beliefs. Lear's story may be as uncomfortable, severe, and troubling as that of Job. But like the greatest poem of ancient and modern times, it lays bare the harsh fact of mortality, highlights the limits of human power, and encourages its audience to contemplate whether death is really the ultimate punishment without resorting to the artificial interpolation of divine interpretation in a pre Christian legend. Shakespeare deftly handles the themes of humility, adversity, and mortality with a view to the transcendent hardship like death is an inevitable feature of human life and one not necessarily at odds with theodicy, as Edgar states. Men must endure their going hence, even as their coming hither. Rightness is all. This is in Act 4, Scene 3. Literature since the days of antiquity has always addressed universal human values. Aristotle in Ethics concept of poetry, literature, as a source of moral values. The Romans treated the poet with equal reverence and called him a vets or prophet, the moral guide of the community. The tragedy of the modern world is that man's material pursuits Man's material pursuits have taken precedence over his spiritual ones. In spite of enormous material prosperity, modern man is getting alienated from his community. His inner life is an arid waste, and without a moral center, the relevance of literature in the context of modern life has not diminished, rather, it has intensified. My lecture purports to study the moral world of Shakespeare's King Lear and how it impinges upon the modern reader. It begins by locating King Lear within the broad philosophical framework of the Shakespearean tragedies, thereby demonstrating how the transgression of natural laws precipitates catastrophes in the human world. It then proceeds to analyze Shakespeare's King Lear, the treatment of a very fundamental human relation, that of the parent and the child, in the context of the perennial conflict between uh, good and evil. This lecture would end by once again calling attention to its aim, which is to establish the ethical value and universality of literary texts as addressing the archetypal human condition and therefore its significance in the curriculum. Since time immemorial, literature has served as a powerful guide to civil life by postulating ethical values. This begs the question, what is ethics? By ethics, do we simply absolute moral rules? Literature teaches us that ethics are not absolute but relative. They are dependent on individual circumstances and cultural differences, as all readers of Sophocles, Antigone, and witnesses of Orestes' dilemma would realize. Thus, even the literary text should not be read in a pious or reverent manner. The reader should be alert and ready to interrogate the very ethical premises that the text offers. Of all art forms, the one, but of all art forms, the one that most problematizes ethics is tragedy because its morality, as pointed out by Aristotle in Poetics, is ambiguous. Tragic protagonists embody the principles of good, but never in an unadulterated form, as Shakespeare demonstrates in his plays. For Shakespeare, the world itself is a stage where reality, like appearance, is ambivalent. His plays embody an enormous variety of characters. The world he depicts is the real world where truth and values are relative. In this sense, Shakespeare is very modern and timeless. This is online class lecture of Professor S.K. Paul, Professor, University Department of English, BRA, Bihar University, Muzaffarpur. King Lear is a play that addresses a virtue that is found to be supreme. King Lear is a play that addresses a virtue that is found to be held supreme in diverse cultures throughout human history, filial piety. Filial piety, as an ethical concept, has a long history. Plato described it as the honor of living parents to whom, as is meet, we have to pay the first and greatest and oldest of all debts, considering that all which a man has belongs to those who gave him birth and brought him up, which he is now to pay back to them when they are old. It was said Plato. In the Christian tradition, the moral norms of Western society is rooted in the Bible. God promulgated to human society 10 commandments, and the fifth one is to honor your parents so that your days may be long in the land that your Lord, your God, is giving you. The fifth commandment, however, is not just a command for indoctrinating children into obeying, loving their parents. It has a never ending life. At the very moment of this crucifixion, when the world's sin was literally, literally uh, nailed into his flesh, Jesus expressed his love for his mother. He said to Mary, "Woman, here is your son," and to John, his most trusted and beloved disciple, "Here is your mother." From that moment on, John took Mary, the mother of Jesus, into his home to care for her. Here we have a very basic negotiation taking place. The son who is facing imminent death acts out of love and concern for the well being of his mother is a supreme definition of the filial bond. In King Lear, Shakespeare problematizes final relations while it depicts the monstrosity of filial ingratitude. It shows the failure of patriarchal institutions on the family and political level, as a story about an aging king and father who willfully relinquishes control to his untrustworthy offspring and banishes his loyal and loving child. It prompts, uh, it prompts us to ask, what about the biblical teachings to parents? To the parents, the Bible teaches, and ye fathers, provoke not your children to wrath. How can the parent provoke? The answer that Shakespeare seems to give is that he can behave like a tyrant by totally disrespecting the autonomy of the child, by demanding unquestioning submission to his demands, which may even be irrational and absurd. Lear in the opening scene in such a opening scene is such a father whose conduct could provoke wrath in the wrong child. But Cordelia is the epitome of filial piety. Notions of filial duty, betrayal, and sibling rivalry resonate throughout King Lear. What Lear's action finally triggers is anarchy and chaos, both in the family and the country. Shakespeare demonstrates how the violation of the natural laws that define the parent child bond can precipitate a tragic catastrophe. Nature, in fact, is as at the very heart of King Lear, from portrayals of human nature to notions of God and divine nature to representations of physical nature and animal imagery. Shakespeare portrays the two extremes of the human condition, good and evil, and invites the readers to reflect on what should be considered natural. The various characters in King Lear define what is natural from their relative positions in the play. When Goneril and Regan drive out their old father after after inheriting his kingdom, human values are threatened. The monstrous daughters are repeatedly compared to wolves and birds of prey as such a young pelicans who are believed to attack and kill their parents. Both Gloucester and Lear are deceived fathers in the Bethlehem beggar, whom he asks, "Didst thou give all to thy daughters? And art thou come to this?" Act 3, Scene 4. Mad with grief, Lear is at the end of his wits in the storm scene, but his madness is thinner than the irresponsible madness of the opening scene. Shakespeare makes the storm scene the site of Lear's epiphany. On the heath, he searches for values and justices. It is ironical that only when he is dispossessed and reduced to the state of unaccommodated man does he feel for the first time compassion for the destitute subjects of his country. He tears off his clothes in order to feel what riches feel. He is also brought to the understanding of the truth that flattery is deceptive. They told me I was everything. It is a lie. Layers dismantling is essential for his transformation, which is yet incomplete. His values and beliefs shaken. He is in the grip of an insane hatred for his thankless daughters. He will renounce hate only when he is reconciled with Cordelia. When all is lost, Cordelia becomes his everything. His transformation is complete when he repents before Cordelia, who is the symbol of good amidst a host of evil characters in the play. In King Lear, Shakespeare depicts a rash, cruel, proud, and childlike father who is blind to everything but the but the dictates of passion. To understand the dangerous consequences of abandoning reason and reverting to passion and amorality, we can go back another episode that treats filial relations in the Bible, that of Noah and his sons after the flood, when Noah, in a drunken stupor, lies naked in his tent, stripped of all respectability. Ham views his father in disgrace and traffics in his shame. Thus, like Goneril and Regan in the Shakespearean play, Ham metaphorically kills Noah as father. Noah, like Lear, is unfathered. Reduced to dust is his authority as father, as guide, as teacher of law, custom, and way of life. Both the stories teach us that such acts of irresponsible passion are dangerous. They could happen in any family, both from the side of disreputable fathers and from the side of impious sons. In contrast to Ham, in the Noah story is his virtuous brother Shem, just as we have in the Lear story the noble Cordelia uh, to her childhood, to contrast to her diabolical sisters. Shem is the son who piously covers the father's nakedness. Noah, when he awakens, cures Canaan, the son of Ham, so that Ham becomes father of the Canaanites, known for their abominable sexual practices. Shem becomes father of the line that leads to Abraham. Noah's Dionysian weakness teaches that fathers and sons will both need instructions to promote filial piety. Lear in the beginning Lear in the beginning shows a lack of understanding of the natural bond between father and daughter when he banishes Cordelia, saying, "Better thou hadst not been born that not the to have pleased me better." By the end of the play, he learns through suffering the real nature of the filial bond and loves itself. In the reconciliation scene, the changed father tells Cordelia, "I know you do not love me, for your sisters have, as I do remember, have done me wrong. You have some cause they have not." Cordelia replies, "No cause, no cause." In Act 4, scene 7. She knees She kneels before him and, and entreats him to hold his hand in benediction over her, thus restoring Lear's faith in filial relations. King Lear invited contradictory ideological positions. It has been interpreted as both a redemptive morality tale and a vision of apocalyptic doom. Some see Lear as a victim, more sinned against than sinning. Act 3, Scene 2. While others see him as the instrument of his own downfall. A.C. Bradley calls it a play of reconciliation. Wilson Knight sees it as a pur- purgatorial text in which redemption is earned through the purification process. Johnson opines that Shakespeare wrote without a moral purpose, and yet others see Lear as Shakespeare's end game, a vision of existence as a pointless joke. The death of Cordelia and the blinding of Gloucester are punishments which far exceed the crime of the fathers. Even though the villains are destroyed and evil defeated. The good are equally dead. Especially disturbing is Cordelia's death. Yet the play has enormous ethical significance. Through Cordelia, though Cordelia dies, the human virtues for which she stood are immortalized in the play, and a kind of justice prevails. The villains are destroyed by their own evil, and Lear and Gloucester do not die until they are reunited with Cordelia and Edgar from they should never have renounced. The play is ultimately about values which have been corrupted and must be restored. Though Cordelia dies, the play immortalizes through her the virtues that are in Jeopardy, love, truth, piety, honor. The closing couplets of King Lear instructs those who would learned from Lear's death and Cordelia's assassination. The weight of this sad time we must obey, speak what we feel, not what we ought what we ought to say. For Cordelia, after all, knew what she risked and closed risked and chose to live truthfully and be the example of the supreme virtue, which is filial piety. In contemporary times, elderly people are increasingly being regarded as burdens as the nuclear families become the norm against the backdrop of rapid economic development that is fast breaking down traditions. There are media reports every now and then about adult children mistreating and abandoning elderly parents. Old age today has become a social challenge to the extent that Indian Parliament passed a new stating that citizens who neglect aging parents could be jailed in the present age, when the mistreatment of elderly parents is so commonplace, we must go back to the texts of the past, like the Bible and the story of King Lear, to regain moral wisdom, and which we have unfortunately lost. So, the dear students of PG semester 1, CC2, Unit 2. So, this way, Professor S.K. Paul is pleased to finish his lecture at this point. So, my lecture is over and it is complete. So, Professor S.K. Paul would like to